Hey, this is Mrs. Smeckens, and we're starting a new skills series. Now I want to teach you how readers can track a single idea across a text. All right, so let's kind of talk about what do you mean by tracking, and let me compare it to something you already know. Remember when we were learning about summarization, and I compared it to SportsCenter, and I said you could watch the whole game or you could watch the much shorter highlights only version on SportsCenter. Remember that? Okay, and so when we were watching the whole game, all of those little details were not retold in the summary, only the most important. But when we went from the whole game to the summary, we did talk about beginning, middle, and end. We talked about the whole game, the whole text. Okay, so when I say tracking, I am referring to across the whole text. So that is similar to summarization. When you track an idea, you're going to look across the whole text. But when we were talking about the game on SportsCenter, we only talked about the most important plays, the highlights, the most important details from the game, the most important athletes, and the most important contributions they made. Okay, that's where tracking is different than summarization. In tracking, I want you to imagine that after watching the game, that the next day on SportsCenter, they didn't talk about all of the most important plays of all of the most important athletes. They talked about one athlete, just one facet, just one idea. You talk about just one something across the whole text. That's what you zoom in and look at. So it's not all of the plays and all of the points and all of the contributors. It's not even just all of the most important. It's just looking at one. It's like X-ray vision. You're just looking at one. Imagine that during the game, there was like a spotlight on this athlete, and all we did was watch that one player throughout the whole game. Okay? That's it. You have no idea what the others are doing. You're just watching that one. So when we track an idea, we're just looking at one facet of the text. All right, so no longer just the most important. In fact, because we're only looking at one facet, we don't want to just look at the big details, the most important details. We want to look at every single detail. Everything the author says about this one facet, we want to take note of. Okay, so that is like tracking an animal. Think of tracking like that. As soon as you see a footprint, you go from beginning to end. You're going to watch for every single footprint, or in a text, every single detail the author gives you about that one facet. Okay, so now if we were reading nonfiction, you could track, you could really zoom in, spotlight in on just an idea, just a concept, and really track it across the text, what they say about it, how it gets developed. In a story, you could track a character, and there might be 4 characters, but I'm talking about one character. You look at one character across the whole text, just one character, and you tell me every single thing you know about him. Track every detail. But it doesn't have to be characters. You could do this with setting. I want you just to look at how the author develops the setting across the whole text. Grab every detail you can about the setting, mood and geographic location and time and temperature and weather and inside and outside and all of it, okay? Or you could track the plot across the whole text from the time we get the problem until the very end when it's resolved. We look at just the plot and we collect every detail across the whole text. This is tracking. Now, we don't have time in this skill series to learn how to track all of those different facets of nonfiction or story elements in literature. So in this series, I'm only going to zoom in on characters. We're going to just get better at looking at how authors develop characters. That's what this skill series is about. Identifying a single character and really zooming in to see everything the author tells us about the character from beginning to end. That's what we mean by tracking. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the value of this skill. So authors develop characters, okay? And They don't just kerplunk in 2 or 3 sentences or a paragraph at the beginning and tell us everything about a character, boom, right at the beginning. I mean, they tell us a lot about the character in the beginning, but then authors layer, sprinkle more details throughout the entire text. Every paragraph, every page, every chapter, the reader is learning more about the character. Authors develop characters, and develop implies time. It's a progression. We need the whole text to really learn about this character. So we want to collect every detail the author sprinkles along the way about this character. And why would we ever want to do this? What's the value in the reader tracking, really understanding, really getting to know a character? Well, it seems more real, doesn't it? I mean, when you're engaged, you're moved, you're emotionally connected to this character, you're like, this is like me, or this is like someone I know, or this seems so real, it's so specific, it's so particular. And so it helps reader engagement. It seems more real, more believable. It's kind of like when you go to a movie and you just get lost in the movie. You're just like, it's like it really happened. It was so vivid. Well, that's why authors develop characters. If they just told us the character's name and what, how tall he was, okay, then we go right into action and plot and all of that, but I don't really empathize with the character. I don't really relate. I don't really get to know them. Okay, and here's something else to know. When a standardized test, when a test question asks you, describe this character, they are so not talking about what he looks like. They don't mean what he looks like on the outside. They mean, who is this character on the inside? Yeah, and you don't really know that from a couple sentences at the beginning of the story. No, authors sprinkle lots of details across the whole text. That's the idea of developing a character, and the reader has to pick up on it. Okay, so now, when do we track a character? When would we ever do this? In terms of the reading process, you get a new text and you're about to read it. Okay, so we put on our mask and we're information thieves before we read, right? Stealing as much information as we can. All right, and then we're reading and we're using reading voice, thinking voice, right? And then after reading, we might do the summary, right? Just kind of the overall gist. Okay, what we're talking about in this skill series happens after the summary. This is an after reading kind of thinking you would do. You collect the details maybe while reading, but you really get to know characters. You really ponder how an author developed them after you read. After you kind of sit back and say, okay, so this is what happened in the story, and this was the character's problem, and this is how he solved it, and yeah, okay, I got the gist. Now we zoom in. Now it's going to require rereading. It is going to require some rereading, looking closely at characters. So now let's identify, well, what do you look for? What are the types of details we should be tracking? Okay, so there are 4 categories of details that authors give us about characters. Each individual character could be developed with any combination or all of these 4 different ways. Okay, now the one that you're most familiar with, I'm sure, and your go-to is going to be what the character looks like. Okay, so I kind of have this like fashionista looking guy here, all right, so that helps you remember what the physical appearance, age, race, size, shape, hair, eye color, accessories, clothing, style. It's all what the character looks like. Okay, so now wait a minute. That doesn't really tell you much about the character. You don't really get to know a character by their outer appearance, what they look like. I mean, I can have a really young character and the character is ruthless on the inside. I can have a really old character and the character is ruthless on the inside. I can have a slightly overweight character who wears a suit every day to work who is ruthless on the inside. The getting to know the ruthlessness of this character, That's what we're talking about. That's what we track. How did the author develop ruthlessness in the character, regardless of his size or shape or age or race? So I'm not going to talk anymore about the physical description of a character. Yes, it's one way authors develop, but that is not what we're working on in this lesson series. That's not really going to help us get to know. Those are not the details I want us to be tracking. Okay, so it is a type of detail, but I'm setting it to the side and I'm not putting it on our anchor chart because I don't want to talk about it anymore. Okay, what I want to talk about in this lesson is the second of the 4 ways that authors develop their characters. And it's the idea of what the character does, his actions. See the kind of like shaky lines there? It's kind of action or movement. It's the idea of the character. He went here, he drove there, he climbed, he slept, he opened, he closed, he jumped, he fell. It's actions. And a lot of times the do is going to be action verbs, tracking, collecting every action this character makes from beginning to end of the text. Because how a character acts tells us a lot about the character on the inside. And that's the reason we track characters, is to watch how authors develop them, and we really get to know who they are on the inside. Okay, so when I say what the character does, and I'm talking about his action. Okay, now do you see how this is green as well? Okay, so the what the character does is all collected with actual details the author wrote and your reading voice noticed. Yeah. I'm talking about going back into the text and looking at the actual words authors gave us, actual details that our reading voice says from beginning to end that tell us what this character did. Okay, so now let's broaden this idea of what a character did or his actions, because it is physical movement, okay, action verbs. It's also how he did it. Okay, so did he walk slowly? Did he speak aggressively? Did he smile enormously? It's adverbs too. It's not just what he did, it's also how he did it. You want to take note of that because that tells you a little more about who this character is on the inside. And when a question asks, how would you describe this character? We don't care that he's slightly overweight and wears a suit. We care about how he acts and who he is on the inside. Okay, so it's action verbs. It's how they act. It's what they do. It's also how they do it. But I want you to broaden the meaning of do to not just be physical. It could also be mental. It's what they do in terms of decisions they make, choices they make. What is he going to do in this situation? Oh, that's what he decided to do. That was the choice he made, the decision he made. So when I say collect all the details about what a character does, I don't just mean physical. I also mean mental. Choices, behaviors, decisions. That needs to be collected under the same category. And when you're looking at all the details that one character does across the whole text, I also want you to consider, how does this character react to other characters? What's his response? What does he do after something happens? So all of this tells us a little more about the character on the inside. And all of this is what the author sprinkles throughout the whole text. We just need to notice it, collect it, take note of it. Okay? So when we talk about this idea of tracking characters, authors develop characters how many ways? 4. One of them is how the character looks. Yes. Okay. Put it on the shelf. I don't want to talk about it anymore. In this lesson, I want to talk about really looking at what the character does. That's the second way, and it's the one I want to put up here on our chart. How does the character act? Choices and decisions, okay? Reactions, behaviors. That's what I want us to log, what I want us to look at and really take note of. Okay, so if we were going to do this, track this. We need a tracking form. We need something to look at and take notes on. And so let's look at our screen here, because this is what I would suggest that we utilize. It's kind of like a timeline. Really, that's all it really is a timeline. I mean, you could essentially just take any piece of paper and draw a horizontal line, beginning of text, end of text, and tell me every single thing the character does from beginning to end. Okay? I'm just going to have us use this form, or if you can't print this form and you're watching this video, you can just do a timeline. But I would like us to just be a little more organized. So I gave it to you in 5 boxes. Don't worry about the 5 boxes. You don't have to have 5. You can have 6. It doesn't really matter. It's just what fits neatly on the page. Okay, but you do see it's just a timeline. And up here it's not a timeline of events as much as a timeline of character development. So that's why I put a character there. So you would write the character's name right here. Okay. And so then we just kind of go through, and as we fill up each box, beginning to end. And so this is like beginning, middle, 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 end. Okay. And we're only looking at literature. We're only looking at character tracking in stories. That's all we're looking at. So we're going to use this resource, and I want to show you what this would look like, how this would work. And as we kind of review a story you've already read, remember American Pepper? Remember that legend? It was one of our first passages we read, one of our first skill series. This was the one where it was the ashes from being cremated that were sent from like her great aunt in America, and they thought it was pepper and they kept eating it. Okay, yeah. So I tell you all that because remember, what we're doing is tracking, and tracking is an after reading skills. So you have to have already read and know the plot. All right, so you already know the gist of this. Now, I just want to track one character. I just want to track Sabni throughout this whole story, and only what Sabni does. I'm not going to make any notes about what she looks like. All right, we'll notice it. All right, we'll tuck it away. But I'm really reading and taking note of, what does Sabni do from beginning to end? All right, so I'm looking for every single detail I can get. All right, so I'll zoom in here on this, and you kind of follow along. I'll get us started, and then I'm going to ask you to help me out. Okay, so "Mummy, Mummy," shouted little Myrna, racing from the front door through the kitchen. "There's a parcel. The postman's brought a parcel," which we know is a package. Her mother, Sabni, looked at her in surprise. She had no, wait a minute, looked at her. What did Sabni do? She looked. Okay, so now I just write do, okay? And then I just say she looked. And I will say, looked at what, so that I have a little context. And so it looked at her daughter, okay? Looked at Myrna. All right, so that's all I write, okay? And after I write a sentence, it's notes. We're taking notes. Okay, let's keep going. Maybe it was a mistake. She'd hurried to the front door to find out. Sure enough, the postman was there holding a parcel the size of a small brick. Oh, holding. No, wait a minute. That's not about Sabni. The postman is holding something. That's what he's doing. But she's not holding. I only track this one character. All right, so I'm only looking for Sabni details and only what she does. Okay, so the postman, says it's from America. So now we'll drop down because that's not about her. It was true in the top right-hand corner. It had the package was addressed to Sabni in big black letters. And well, I suppose it must be from my great aunt Posny, said Sabni to herself. Okay, wait, that's not what she does. That's what she says. So just let that go. Okay, the postman left. All right, whistling. That's not Sabni. Bottom, now let's move up. Although it had been 20 years, I thought she would have been dead by now, she said. She's not doing anything, she's talking. That doesn't count as doing. Don't write that down. All right, Sabni's husband, Jornis, and her son, Arianus, were just coming in from the garden. Okay, that's not about her. All right, so let's keep going. So far, Sabni's only done one thing, and it wasn't even all that big. She looked at her daughter. You have to recognize that plot takes over and setting takes over. And we get a lot of this at the beginning. So they start to do a little more of those characters as the story progresses. So don't freak out, you've missed anything. Okay, now let me back up for a minute. And you see how I have kind of these triangle things breaking it up? Okay, I did that so that that's the first box, and then here's the second box. See the triangles? Okay, third box. So we're going to jump into the second box if she does anything. Let me do one or two more, and then I'll ask you to help me. Setting the parcel down in the middle of the table, Sabni carefully began to tear open the paper. Ooh. So what did Sabni do? I'm going to write do in the second box because I'm in the second chunk, second episode here. What did she do? She set down the package. So I'm just writing set down package, abbreviate PKG. I know what I mean. Set down package and tore it open or tears open the package. Got it. All right, let's keep going. Inside, there was a large silver container with a hinged lid, which was taped shut. There was also a letter. What is it, says her daughter. I have no idea, says Sabni. Okay, wait a minute, that's spoken. It's not what she's doing, so leave it alone. Okay, she goes on to tell us a little more about her great aunt. We're going to skip all that until, look, right here. She opened and opened the folded page cautiously because there was a letter inside. All right, you tell me. Help me out here. We're still in the second chunk. Did she do anything? She opened the letter. Okay, where am I writing it? Second chunk. Label it with do, and what do I write? Yeah, opened letter. Don't make this hard. All right, opened letter. Got it. All right, so now we'll keep going. Okay, then she looked up in dismay. Well, this is no help, she said. Okay, and then she said all this, skip, skip, skip. Well, open the pot anyway. That's not her. Cautiously, Sabni pulled the tape from the neck of the silver pot and opened the lid. Foreheads touched the top of the container as their owners stared down. What did Sabni do in that last paragraph? Okay, we're still in the second chunk. What did she do? Verbs. Look at action verbs. She pulled off the tape, opened the lid, and then foreheads, Jornis, Arianus, Myrna, and Sabni, foreheads touched and leaned over and stared in. So Sabni was one of them. So what did Sabni do? She pulled the tape. Write all this down. All these little details are important to know. Pulled the tape, opened the lid. I'm writing open lid and stared inside. Got it. Stared inside. See what we're doing here? Okay. Strange, said Arianus, and we could keep on going. All right. We just keep going. Seeing what we're doing? Okay. And so the idea that authors give us details about what a character does. As a reader, we want to track those. And we can do it on any old timeline that we make on scratch paper. We could do it with this kind of a timeline tracker. So here's what I'd like you to do now. If you were in Mrs. Smecken's class, I would take you back to the carpet fitter. Do you remember that? Eddie, the carpet fitter, the cigarettes, the parakeet, Armand. Oh gosh, yes. Okay, I want you to go back to this passage. And if you've never read it, just read it. Okay, but then I want you to use either a piece of paper, make a timeline, or this timeline tracker. And I want you to read through the carpet fitter, and I'll have chunked it out into 5 chunks for you. And I want you to collect everything that Eddie does. So there are different characters in this. There's Armand the parakeet, there's Mrs. V, and there's Eddie. I only want you to track Eddie, and I want you to tell me everything Eddie does from beginning to end. All right, just take quick notes, use abbreviations. It only makes sense to you, but take notes on everything he does. If you were in Mrs. Smecken's class, that's what we'd be doing, but your teacher might have a better idea.